to welcome everyone to the services here at the 84th Street Church of Christ. And we're about to start the lesson of the hour. I'd like to start the lesson of the hour with a quote. And it's by a man by the name of Donald James Wheel. He's an Englishman, and he's an author, and he's a contemporary of my dad's generation. But Donald James Wheel, who wrote a book entitled The Fall of the Russian Empire, and who also wrote a book on the Third Reich in Nazi Germany, stated the following quote. He stated that when a well-packaged web of lies has been sold gradually to the masses over generations, the truth will seem utterly preposterous and the speaker a raving lunatic. So this morning we're going to talk about something that the Bible plainly and clearly teaches that is today labeled as utter lunacy to most scientific and highly educated people of the world, the so-called experts. And I need to warn you in advance that if you say you believe on what the Bible teaches on this subject, you too will likely be labeled as both a lunatic and delusional, and that will likely be the kindest adjectives they use to describe you. Of course, you'll be speaking the truth, but like our quote states, practically no one will believe you, particularly in the greater scientific communities. This morning we're going to be talking about the age of the earth. Is it thousands of years old, or is it billions of years old? And probably more than any other reason, I was motivated to present this morning's lesson because of my grandchildren. My two oldest grandchildren have developed a genuine fascination with dinosaurs. They watch dinosaur cartoons like Dinosaur Train. They have children's books about dinosaurs. I read with my oldest one just yesterday a book about dinosaurs. They have dinosaur toys. They have dinosaur clothes. And my oldest granddaughter always wants a toy dinosaur that you get out of a machine for $5 at the zoo. You know, one of those cheap plastic hot molded injection dinosaurs that you get out of a machine for $5. She knows the names of several of the various dinosaurs. I have to ask her their names sometimes, and at 4 years old, she can tell me what they are: the Brontosaurus, Tyrannosaurus, Stegosaurus, and so forth. Well, did dinosaurs exist? I believe so. The fossil evidence sure indicates that they did. The question is, when? As you probably know, there's a big discrepancy between creationists and evolutionists as to how old the earth is. Evolutionists say that the earth is roughly 4.5 billion years old, and the universe itself is roughly 14 billion years old. On the other hand, the Bible states that everything that you and I see today was initially created by God approximately 6,000 years ago. That's a huge difference, isn't it? A huge difference. Is it even possible that the earth could be that young? Is it even possible that the earth and the universe could be as old as the evolutionists say that it is? That's what we're going to be looking at this morning. And let me start out by saying that which view you take on how old the earth is and how old the universe is really based on your own paradigm or your way of looking at things. It is as much a belief system as it is anything. Do you believe in the Bible, or do you believe in the theories of men? Do you believe in God, or do you not believe in God? If you don't believe in God, you will look at the evidence you see in a completely different way, and it will skew your perception of what you do see and cause you to come to various erroneous conclusions. Let me give you an example. Martha and I recently took a vacation to Colorado, and we spent the first night in Tucumcari, New Mexico. On the south side of Tucumcari, next to I-40, there's a huge mesa that's 771 feet high. It dominates the whole area, and you can see it for miles away. I got up the next morning, and as I was looking out the hotel window, looking at that mesa, there was nothing around it for miles and miles. It's sitting pretty much by itself. And I can see, and you can see all the different layers of the different strata quite easily. And as I was looking at, knowing I was going to present this lesson, I was wondering, how did God make that? But an evolutionist would look at it and wonder, how did nature and the natural processes make that? Two completely different viewpoints, two completely different paradigms. But note this, and this is very important. Neither one of us were there when that mesa was made. I didn't see God make it, and the evolutionists didn't see nature make it. Don't ever forget that. That's very important. The evolutionist doesn't know because they weren't there to see it. They can postulate, they can theorize, they can calculate, they can brainstorm, but they can't know because they weren't there. None of us have any firsthand personal knowledge of how things like that were made. Don't ever forget that. Do you remember what do you remember what God told Job in the book of Job? In Job chapter 38, 4 through 6, this is what God said. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? To what were its foundations fastened? Or who laid its cornerstone? You see, Job wanted answers from God, as he stated in Job chapter 31, 35, but he didn't get any answers. He got questions from God. Questions that he couldn't even begin to possibly answer. Before Job had an actual audience with God, we kind of see his attitude. In Job chapter 31, 37, this is what Job says. I would declare to him the number of my steps. Like a prince, I would approach him. But after 4 chapters of questioning by God, righteous Job completely changed his tune. Suddenly it was no longer important for him to know the answer to his own problems. Listen to what he said to God. In Job chapter 42, 1 through 6, it says, Then Job answered the Lord and said, I know that you can do everything, and that no purpose of yours can be withheld from you. You asked, who is this who hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me which I did not know. Listen, please, and let me speak. You said, I will question you, and you shall answer me. I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore I abhor myself and repent in dust and ashes. Like Job, none of us can know anything specific about the distant past except what God has revealed to us in His Word. The Mesa and Tucumcari, did God make it at the beginning, or was it formed after the Great Flood? If it was formed after the Great Flood, what happened to all the billions of cubic miles of missing landscape that was around it? And why does it have layers? Like I already said, I don't know. I wasn't there. And like I also said, the evolutionist may think that he knows, and he may come up with elaborate theories, which are guesses, to explain the origin of that specific mesa, but he doesn't know either, because he wasn't there when it was made. The only way that you and I can know anything about the origins of the universe, the origins of the earth, and the origins of life on earth is if we have an eyewitness to those events. Fortunately, we do. God Himself is our eyewitness, but we can only know what He has revealed to us. How old is the earth? How long did it take to make everything that we see with our eyes? The Bible tells us. Like the Mesa question, it doesn't tell us everything, but it does tell us what we need to know. The very first verse of the Bible sets the basis for the entire book. In Genesis chapter 1:1, it says, In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. A simple, straightforward verse, very easy to understand. From this starting point in the Bible, God tells us that He was the one who created the heavens and the earth. So how long did it take Him? Billions of years? Well, not according to Scripture. If you have your Bibles, let's turn to Genesis chapter 1, starting in verse 3. We're not going to read the entire chapter. We're going to highlight the verses. Starting in verse 3, it says, Then God said, Let there be light, and there was light. And God saw the light, and that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness, and God called the light day, and the darkness He called night. So the evening and the morning were the first day. Next verse. Then God said, Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. Skipping down to verse 8, and God called the firmament heaven. So the evening and the morning were the second day. Next verse. Then God said, Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear, and it was so. Skipping down to verse 13. So the evening and the morning were the third day. Then God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons and for days and years. Skipping down to verse 19. So the evening and the morning were the fourth day. Next verse. Then God said, let the waters abound with the abundance of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth, above the face of the firmament of the heavens. Skipping down to verse 23. So the evening and the morning were the fifth day. Then God said, let the earth bring forth the living creatures according to its kind, cattle and creeping things, and beasts of the earth, each according to its kind. It was so. And then skipping down to verse 26, then God said, let us make man in our image according to our likeness. And then skipping down to verse 31, then God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. So the evening and the morning were the sixth day. Then Genesis 2:1, thus the heavens and the earth and all the host of them were finished. So it took God from start to finish 6 days to create everything. That's what this passage says. It's pretty simple. But someone might ask, well, what does the word day always mean a 24-hour period? Could the word day be symbolic for billions of years, or could it be symbolic for an age? It could if the context allowed it. For example, someone might say, back in my grandfather's day, the roads were so poor it took over 20 days to drive across America during the day. Here we have the word day used 3 times in a single sentence, and each of the words have a different meaning. The first word day is talking about an age. The second word day is talking about a 24-hour period. And the third word day is talking about the daylight part of a day. So what about Genesis chapter 1? Does the word day mean a 24-hour period? Well, the Hebrew word for the word day is the word yom, Y-O-M. And anytime yom is used outside of Genesis 1, it always means an ordinary 24-hour day when you add the following. If you add yom plus a number in either plural or singular sense, and that's used 410 times in the Old Testament, it always means a 24-hour day. When you use evening or morning with yom, and that's used 23 times in the Old Testament, it always means a 24-hour day. When you use night with yom, and that's used 52 times in the Old Testament, it always means a 24-hour day. Even when you use just evening and morning without yom, and that's used 38 times in the Old Testament, then it always means a 24-hour day. So what about Genesis 1? Verse 5, evening, morning, number, day. Verse 6, evening, morning, number, day. Verse 13, verse 14, verse 23, verse 31, evening, morning, number, day. Folks, what we have here is contextual overkill by God. It's like he wanted to make absolutely sure that we fully and completely understand that he's talking about a 24-hour day. And like I say, to hammer that fact home, he actually used contextual overkill. And if that is not enough, we can see it again in Exodus chapter 20:11, where it says this, for in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. So quite frankly, when someone says that the word day here can mean billions of years and that Genesis 1 is teaching evolution, they are completely taking the plain message of Genesis 1 out of context and inserting their own ideas, trying to make a plain and simple passage say something that it doesn't say grammatically. Well, what about the earth only being roughly 6,000 years old? Where does that come from? Well, you won't find a single passage in the Bible that says the earth is 6,000 years old, but what we do have is something even better, the genealogies. In Genesis chapter 5, 1 through 32, we have the genealogy from Adam to Noah and how old each descendant was when they had their next in line son. Then beginning in Genesis 11, verses 10 through 26, we have the genealogy of Noah's son, Shem, down to Abraham, and also how old each descendant was when they had their next in line son. All of these together total approximately 2,000 years. Then starting with Abraham, we have the genealogies of the patriarchs until the departure of Egypt of the children of Israel, a period of just slightly over 300 years. Then we have the period of Egyptian bondage that is described of exactly 430 years in Exodus 12:40 and again in the New Testament in Galatians 3:17. Then we have the 40 years of wandering that is found in the book of Exodus. Then we have the period of the judges in the book of the Judges with the time period each judge ruled. After that, we have the chronology of the kings down to the Babylonian captivity. The time period of each of these rulers was stated in the books of the Kings and Chronicles. We have the 70 years of Babylonian captivity, followed by the restoration of the faithful Jews to Jerusalem and Judea. From that point on, we have the recorded history of the Persians, followed by the recorded history of the Greeks, then followed by the recorded history of the Romans. It was during this time that Jesus was born in Bethlehem. So from the time of Abraham down to the birth of Christ is a time period of approximately 2,000 years. And from the birth of Christ until today represents a time period of approximately 2,000 years. So doing the math comes up with the age of the earth to be approximately 6,000 years old. And even if you were to calculate a time calculation error of 5 to 10%, you are still well within 300 to 600 years of that time period. There is just no way that the earth could be billions and billions of years old according to the Bible. God clearly told us about the 6 24-hour days of creation. He put in the genealogies with the ages and the chronology of the judges and kings with the names of the rulers who ruled and the historic time after Israel came back from Babylonian captivity so that we could fully understand just how old the earth really is. It and the universe are not billions and billions of years old according to the Bible. And at this point, we could just stop our lesson. We really don't need to say any more. God is our eyewitness to the things of the past that we or anybody else cannot see or know about. And He has told us what we need to know about our origins. However, I think that it might be important to delve into this subject a little further due to the great error that we are all bombarded with on a near daily basis about this subject. I also think it's important because a lot of people are going to lose their souls over this. You see, if the earth is only 6,000 years old, there's not enough time for evolution to occur. And if you say the earth is billions of years old, then in effect you are calling God a liar. And if you call God a liar, how can you be saved? So it's very serious business. And it's also serious business because there are apparently some churches of Christ in Oklahoma that are teaching evolution. My son-in-law and Lance Sparks of the Blair congregation, where I sometimes go down and preach when I go visit them, they told me of another congregation that's in southwest Oklahoma that is either condoning it or outright teaching it. When I heard that, I was a little shocked. Lance told me that he had a discussion with 4 of the prominent women of that congregation, and they said that to them it's perfectly okay to believe in evolution because it is not a salvation issue. Let that soak in for just a second. Not a salvation issue. You take Genesis 1, basically, and either with a real pair of scissors or scissors of your mind, you say that's not true, and you just cut it out, wad it up, throw it over. And while you're at it, you better take John chapter 1, because John chapter 1 talks about Jesus' role in creation. So you have to go back and even take that part of the Bible out. Well, you know, it's definitely a salvation issue. Absolutely it's a salvation issue. And you know, evolution to me is a fantastic fairy story of the highest magnitude. Do you remember the fairy story of the woman kissing a talking frog and it instantly turned into a handsome prince? The frog kept trying to get each passing beautiful woman to kiss him by telling him he was really a prince and that an evil witch had cast a spell on him and turned him into a frog. Well, we understand that this is a fairy story and we treat it as such. But if you think about it, evolution teaches the same thing. The only thing that is missing is billions of years. In fact, Nobel Prize winner George Walt wrote an article entitled The Origin of Life in the August 1954 issue of the Scientific American. And on page 48, this is what he said. He said, "Time is in fact the hero of the plot. What we regard as the impossible on the basis of human experience is meaningless here. Given so much time, the impossible becomes possible. the possible probable, and the probable virtually certain. One only has to wait. Time itself performs the miracles. You got that? Time itself performed the miracle. This is a Nobel Prize winner says this. Time is the hero. Did you know that in order to believe that evolution is how we got here, you have to believe in at least one non-divine miraculous event, and then not just one, but you have to believe in 3 different consecutive evolutions. You have to believe in the Big Bang, which is a non-divine miracle. You then have to believe in cosmological evolution, which is the formation of the stars and of galaxies. And then you have to believe in geologic evolution, which is the formation of the earth and planets. And finally, you have to believe in biologic evolution, which is the formation of life. And to believe in those, you have to believe that, number one, everything came from nothing. That's the Big Bang. Number two, you have to believe that life came from non-life. You have to believe that information came from matter, like the DNA code. You have to believe that order came from disorder. And that's just for starters. When you really look at what they believe in versus what we believe, I have to ask myself, who are the crazy ones for what they for believing what they believe? The evolutionists or the creationists? It's absurd and fantastic what they ask us to believe. And if you ask them, where did the Big Bang come from? This is, in essence, their answer. I'm going to give you the 5-second answer. That's it. There is no answer. And at least a good answer. I heard one the other day on YouTube. The guy said, he said that nothing existed before the Big Bang because time itself didn't exist. He said that time had to be created first in order for there to be a Big Bang. Okay. So where did time come from? Same answer as the Big Bang. It just gets nonsensical. I guess if you're going to make up a lie about something, just let's make it a big one. Let's make it a whopper. Well, where did all this come from? The idea that the earth is billions and billions of years old. Well, it actually originated back in the 1780s by a man by the name of James Hutton. He had an interest in geology, and he wrote a book in 1785 entitled The Theory of the Earth. In his book, he introduced the idea of uniformitarianism. That's a 50-cent word. And how I remembered it was a man standing at attention and in his uniform. And that's how I remembered it. Uniformitarianism. And this is the definition. It says, based on everything he observed, he said that this is the definition, that the present is the key to understanding the past. He postulated that everything that occurred in the past is the same as what we see today. That all the geologic formations we see that have taken billions of years to form based on the levels of erosion that we see today, kind of like the Grand Canyon. Look at the Grand Canyon and say, whoa, the current rate of the flow of the water, it would take billions of years for this canyon to form. So therefore, the earth is billions of years old. Well, prior to him writing this book, practically all scientists believed in the biblical account of creation. Many founders of scientific disciplines, such as Bacon, Newton, Kepler, Galileo, Pascal, Boyle, Dalton, Linnaeus, and Mendel, and Maxwell and Kelvin, they all were Bible-believing creationists. They didn't see anything wrong with the biblical account of creation because to them it made sense. Later, though, after Hutton wrote his book, another scientist in 1830, Charles Lyell, a Scottish lawyer, who is known as the founding father of geology, wrote a book entitled Principles of Geology that used these same concepts of uniformitarianism throughout the book. Like Hutton, Lyell theorized that the geological processes that were around at the beginning of time were the same ones that happened in the present as well, and that they worked the same way. And like I say, he wasn't there, but this is his theory, which is a guess. A theory is a guess. As a result, he said the earth was several hundred million years old in his book. And this is something else, too. Lyell said in a letter to a friend after he wrote his book that his goal, this was his goal in writing the book, was to free the science from Moses. Well, after Lyell wrote his book, the idea of uniformitarianism in millions of years started catching on. In fact, Charles Darwin had a copy of Lyell's book with him when he made his famous voyage to the Galapagos Islands, and he used some of the principles of uniformitarianism to come up with his theory of biologic evolution. And he came up with this theory to try and explain why you see some of the varieties of the animals that are unique to the islands. Darwin said, we don't need a creator to explain the diversity of life. Just give natural processes enough time. Never mind the creation. Never mind the flood. Never mind the providence of God. And the rest is history. And that takes us to today, where the lie has become the mainstream dogma and has thoroughly permeated the current population. But this idea of vast stretches of time in uniformitarianism is refuted by the Bible. Not only have we established the age of the earth, but the Bible makes it clear that things weren't always like they were. In Genesis chapter 2:4, it says, a mist went up from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground. I've never seen anything like that, have you? Where the water comes out of the ground and waters the plants. Well, before the flood, that apparently was the norm, that the earth itself watered the plants. It says in verse 5 of Genesis 2 that the Lord God had not caused it to rain on the earth. That doesn't sound like uniformitarianism to me, does it to you? Also in Genesis 7, we read about another great anti-uniformitarianism event, the Great Flood that flooded the entire world. And some critics of the Bible say that's impossible. There's not enough water on earth to cover everything, and it's impossible for it to rain everywhere at once. Well, one thing to remember about the flood, it is not a natural event like we see today. It was a God-induced killing event. God said in verse 17 of Genesis 7 that I myself am bringing floodwaters on the earth, and that the objective was to kill all flesh that breathed air that was on the earth, like it says in the same chapter. And of course, God would not have any problem doing this, and he could easily create all the water that was necessary if he needed to. And to be sure, both local and regional floods today are some of the most destructive forces on the planet. You would have to raise that destructive ability exponentially if there was a worldwide flood that swept everything away. This is why we have fossilized dinosaur skeletons today. Do you realize how hard it is to make a fossil? It's just almost impossible. You always find them, dinosaurs, in waterborne strata, and they are more or less intact. And in some sites, there are hundreds of them together. They were killed and covered up with sediment so quickly that they didn't have time to be scavenged or rot. For example, about 10 years ago, I was out deer hunting, and I shot a coyote. And when I shot him, I just left him where he was. I walked over and looked at him, but I just left him. Didn't move him, didn't touch him, nothing. Well, I came back exactly a week later, and I couldn't find any trace of that coyote. And I started walking a circle. Well, he's got to be here somewhere. And about 25 yards out, I found a little piece of paw that was about the size of my thumbnail. Everything else had been eaten or carried off. And quite frankly, I was shocked. I was thinking there should be something left, a bone or something, but there wasn't hardly a trace. Not so with the dinosaurs. It was a massive, worldwide, cataclysmic killing event that killed them off and left them where we can see them today. And not only that, but all the other animals that were killed and deposited in waterborne strata, as well as massive amounts of trees and plant material that too were buried and became seams of coal covered by clay, rock, and dirt. And although the Bible doesn't give us Noah and his family's reaction as they stepped off the ark, I would imagine they would have struggled just to try and find anything that looked halfway familiar after such a destructive event. So to say that things have always been the same is obviously not true according to the Bible. And besides the biblical revelation from the only eyewitness who was there when the earth was made, God, there is scientific evidence that the earth is much younger than the evolutionists say that it is. There's also a scientific maxim I want to introduce you to. It's called Occam's razor, and it is commonly used in science today to explain observable phenomena. It is called a razor because it is designed to cut away and eliminate those explanations that are the least likely. It was first postulated by William of Ockham back in the Middle Ages. It states that for any observable phenomenon, the most simple explanation is most likely the correct one. For example, the pyramids of Egypt. We all are familiar with that. Well, were they built by aliens who traveled in spaceships from distant galaxies and who came to Earth because they wanted to build Great Pyramids that are found in Egypt? Or were they built by the ancient Egyptians? Well, using Occam's razor, we would conclude from the known evidence that we know about that they were more likely built by the ancient Egyptians. So here's problem number one for evolutionists. If the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, how come we still have comets? They are basically frozen muddy snowballs that vent off gas and debris as they orbit the sun. The observable life expectancy of comets is no more than 100,000 years. No problem for creationists, but it is a big, big problem for evolutionists, and it's one they don't like to talk about. So young Earth or old Earth, what would Occam's razor say? Problem number two for evolutionists. If the Earth and the Moon are 4.5 billion years old, how do you explain the Moon's recession away from the Earth? From the still functional retroreflectors left on the Moon by Apollo 11, Apollo 14, and Apollo 15, it has been determined that the distance between the Earth and the Moon is increasing at the rate of 1.49 inches per year. This is caused by the tidal bulge pulling ahead of the Moon as the Earth rotates, causing a transfer of energy to the Moon's orbital motion. Good example of that, you go to the park this afternoon, you get on a swing and you start, how do you make that swing move? You shift your weight back and forth and you use gravity and you make that swing higher and higher. And that's what the tides are doing as the Earth rotates, and that bulge, it's causing the Moon to go just a little faster. And, you know, any good spaceman knows how do you increase your orbit. You go just a little bit faster in that orbital crease. But this recession of the Moon creates a big problem for evolutionists. Going back in time about 3 million years, that would mean the Moon is so close to the Earth and the tides would be so severe that the Earth would be destroyed twice a day by water sweeping over the continents. So young Earth or old Earth, what would Occam's razor say? Problem number three for evolutionists. If the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, how do you account for the implications of the current rate of decreasing magnetic field on the Earth? It has been carefully measured since 1829, and it has decreased about 10% in the last 150 years. At the current rate of decay, that means if you went back in time about 7,000 years, the magnetic field of the Earth would be about 32 times stronger than it is today. At that level, it would actually be a good thing. But if you went back, say, 1 million years ago, using the theory of uniformitarianism, the magnetic field would be so strong that it would actually destroy the Earth. So young Earth or old Earth, what would Occam's razor say? Problem number four for evolutionists. If the universe is 14 billion years old, how do you account for the lack of large supernova remnants in the galaxy? Supernovas, which are exploding stars, are estimated to occur at the rate of approximately 4 per year in the known universe. Some are obscured by stellar dust, but it has been calculated that the remnants of these exploding stars that can be seen would be visible for up to 6 million years after they occur. It would take approximately that long for them to completely dissipate until they couldn't be detected. And at that rate, approximately 4 per year, there should be tens of thousands of visible supernova remnants. However, there are no, get that, zero, no large supernova remnants to be seen anywhere. The biggest are approximately 7,000 years old, and there are only about 200 visible supernova remnants, not tens of thousands like they're supposed to be. So young universe or old universe, what would Occam's razor say? Problem number 5 for evolutionists, and this is a good one. How do you account for soft tissue recently found in dinosaur fossils? This actually made the TV show 60 Minutes about 12 years ago. And you can see it on YouTube. You can go to type Dr. Mary Schweitzer 60 Minutes. You'll be able to see that show. But Dr. Mary Schweitzer accidentally found soft tissue in a supposedly 68 million year old Tyrannosaurus rex fossilized leg bone when she put part of it in acid to etch the surface so she could study it, and she accidentally left it in the acid too long, completely dissolving away all the rock material. What was left was non-fossilized dinosaur soft tissue. Under the microscope, she was able to identify blood and blood vessels, and you look at the show, she took her little probe and was moving them around. And she thought she had made a mistake. So she repeated the test several times, all with the same results, and she finally ended up publishing it. and then made it on TV. Well, per scientists, soft tissue is not supposed to be found in a fossil after it's over 1 million years old. So, old dinosaur bones or young dinosaur bones? What would Occam's razor say? And somebody might say, well, Larry, doesn't it take millions of years for fossils to form? Not if the conditions are right. On June 10th, 1886, at 1:40 a.m., a volcano on the North Island of New Zealand blew its top, and for 4 hours spewed red-hot rocks, mud, ash, and smoke over the countryside, and covered an area of 5,800 square miles in various depths of debris. One of the villages that was covered was the small settlement of Te Waroa. It had a church, it had a school, and it had 2 hotels that were buried in the volcanic debris. Prior to the eruption, the area was internationally known for its mineral hot springs and enormous white and pink mineral terraces covering 8 acres. Well, all of that, along with the settlement, were destroyed by the volcano. But 60 years after the eruption, the settlement was excavated and they uncovered a number of petrified and fossilized items. All of these items were buried quickly in the highly mineralized soil and volcanic debris, and as a result, they did not have access to the normal bacterial and microbial rot and decay processes. The top photo shows a petrified bowler hat of the time period. The second photo shows a petrified ham. The third photo shows a petrified bag of flour. And the fourth photo that looks like petrified sausage, or they think they're either petrified medicine or petrified lamp fuel. Now, if you picked up any one of these items and you accidentally dropped it on your foot, you would go, ow, I just dropped a heavy hard rock on my foot, because that's in effect what you did. Well, when the physics department of the University of Auckland was contacted about the nature of the ham, they admitted that it was indeed a fossilized ham. But they said that their textbooks would not allow them to formally call it a fossil because according to the textbooks, it didn't take millions of years to form. Isn't that the whole point, that it didn't take millions of years to form, but just 60 years? Well, obviously the textbooks are wrong. But do you see what we're talking about here? Your basic paradigm or your belief system will completely influence how you view the evidence. Dr. Mary Schweitzer looked at the soft tissue she discovered in dinosaur bones, and she said that we now have to completely rethink the fossilization process. We scientists have got to figure out how 68 million year old dinosaur bones can still have soft tissue in them. Mary, what does your evidence really say about your dinosaur bones? Are they millions of years old, or are they thousands of years old? What would Occam's razor say? Problem number 6 for evolutionists. How do you account for detectable radioactive carbon-14 in things like buried coal seams that are supposed to be hundreds of millions of years old, and even in things like diamonds that the potassium-argon tests say are over 1.2 billion years old? The radioactive half-life of carbon-14 causes it to decay at such a rate that it becomes completely undetectable when it's over 100,000 years old. So how can you have detectable carbon-14 in something that's supposed to be billions of years old? Like diamonds. Well, is it old diamonds or is it young diamonds? Is it old coal seams or is it young coal seams? What would Occam's razor say? If we had the time, we don't have the time, but if we had the time, we could continue this line of questioning for the rest of the day. We have only touched on the secular evidence that points to a young Earth and discounts an Earth and universe that are billions of years old. We haven't talked about the Poynting-Robertson effect. We haven't talked about the presence of helium in rocks in the atmosphere. We haven't talked about the presence of young spiral galaxies. We haven't talked about the complete lack of civilizations over 6,000 years old. We haven't talked about the current population of the Earth. We haven't talked about the gross miscalculation of the age of new volcanic rocks using the potassium-argon dating method and the known errors of carbon-14 radiometric dating era, showing freshly killed animals as thousands of years old and so forth. Nor have we covered the lack of fossil meteorites, the lack of solar erosion, the lack of extreme continental erosion, the lack of extreme amounts of salt in the ocean. If the Earth is billions and billions of years old, all of these things and more would be present. So we now have to ask the question, why don't we hear about the evidence for a young Earth in science textbooks and on science TV documentaries and in museum displays? Why is nearly everything everywhere, always portrayed as being billions and billions of years old. Well, I think fundamentally, as I stated in the beginning of our lesson, is the paradigm or belief system that one holds on to. Listen to this quote by Dr. Scott Todd of the Kansas State University Immunology Department, which typifies the modern scientific viewpoint. He's actually a believer in God and creation, but he is also a scientist too, and he describes the stone wall that exists in the minds of many of his modern contemporaries. He said that even if all the data, pointed to an intelligent designer, such a hypothesis is excluded from science because it is not naturalistic. Never mind the facts. Let's just keep holding onto our belief system that the earth is billions of years old, regardless of any evidence to the contrary. This naturalistic viewpoint dominates the scientific community today to the extent that the volumes of scientific evidence that points to a creation and a creator are simply ignored and are quietly swept under the rug, as it were, which is somewhat amazing if you think about it. When and if scientific facts point to a young earth, we will just ignore those facts so we can continue to believe in what we want to believe. So the great lie about the extreme age of the earth continues, but you don't have to believe it. And believe me, there'll be a lot of people who will lose their souls over this because they will accept the lie and reject the truth, even the truths that they themselves discover. They will accept the lie that there is no God, and they will accept the lie that all of this that we see was made by itself, for itself, with no divine intervention whatsoever. My friends, one of the great truths of the Bible is the story of creation. The earth is not billions of years old, but it is thousands of years old. It was created by a loving, all-powerful, all-wise, omniscient God. And this great God has not only provided for us physically, but more importantly, he has provided for us spiritually as well. And with that, my brethren, the lesson is yours, and we'll be led in a closing prayer.